So we're going to explore something today that touches all of us in a very important way, and that's the desire to be free. We're still in July, right? We celebrated freedom. But really, what we're going to delve into even more deeply is spiritual understanding and how that really is the key to our true freedom. Now, I know you may be saying, well, there's a lot going on right now. I'm not feeling so secure. I'm not feeling so grounded. I'm a little anxious. And I hear you. I know that's true. But freedom is not a condition of the outer world. It has nothing to do with what's going on out there. Because isn't out there always going to be stormy at times and whirling and chaotic at times? But when we experience deeply freedom in our soul, that's where we can find joy. That's where we can feel that sense of spaciousness, because fear's no longer impacting us in that way. And we begin to see with those spiritual eyes that I've spoken about before. So let's start by just leaning into freedom as an inner experience. Doug shared a very personal story about how he's walking through what could feel like a pretty scary situation with faith, with trust, with belief. He is being a model for all of us right now of how we can live through some hiccups or those tweaks that we really didn't want to see materialize. We can walk in a way that feels compassionate, both to ourselves and to the people in our lives. When you told that story of that young family with their little toddler, I could see them, and I could see the joy that was leaping out of their hearts as they walked into their new home. But not everybody would have behaved in that way. Not everybody would have been as generous. So, true freedom, I'm going to tell you a bit of a story, is something that allows us to pause. And I can imagine you all had a bit of a pause there between what happened and how you ultimately responded. And Dr. Viktor Frankl, who is a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, he wrote a book that was one of my early books I read in my training during my both master's and doctorate in counseling. He created a whole theory of psychotherapy based on his experience. And this one concept that he delineated was pausing between stimulus and response. And that's where your freedom lies. He said when he was a prisoner in Auschwitz, the one thing they could never take from him was his ability to choose. And he saw amazing things happen where people would give away their last piece of bread, where they would comfort others that were suffering, and they still had the ability to choose how to respond in an unthinkable circumstance. So that means when we're spiritually free, that we're not driven, we're not overreacting, we're not into fear, we're not into anger or blame. We're letting go of some of those old habits that maybe you've written on your pieces of paper during burning bowl services. And that somehow some of those sneak back in trying times, right? And we have to keep blessing and releasing. But spiritual freedom allows us to choose peace over those old responses, to not be reactive in the same old ways, to listen before we make a leap, and to make a leap of faith rather than fear. Brazilian novelist Paulo Coelho says something also important for us to remember and tune into. He says, freedom is not the absence of commitments, but the ability to choose and commit to what is right for you. Now, maybe you've already heard something today that tweaked your interest. Maybe you thought, I want to be one of those daily word readers. It's not a, I have to, or somebody's forcing me to, or making me. It's, I choose this. I want that. When we can embrace those things that are good for us and nurture us and fuel our spiritual growth, that's powerful. That is being empowered and proactive, living with grace and love. But it also allows us to walk through difficulties without collapsing, to kind of know that we're safe, know that there's a safety net there for us. Sometimes we have a story that we've repeated, and we can finally release that and let that go. So how do we cultivate this kind of liberty? How do we really fuel our freedom and our growth? One of the doorways that I want to focus on is understanding, true spiritual understanding. So in Unity, we talk a lot about Charles Fillmore and the 12 powers. And we know those are our divine, innate gifts, that we have these tools, these abilities, these powers, if you will. And understanding isn't not about being smart. It's not about having all this intellectual knowledge, although I know you all are, and I appreciate that. I like to know things and learn things too. I like Google. But Charles Fillmore had a different idea. It's a sacred faculty of consciousness. And he defined it as the ability of our mind to apprehend and realize the laws of thought and the relation of ideas one to another. Now, there's a lot to unpack with that, but it allows us to see, again, with spiritual eyes, and to see beneath or above, however you want to conceptualize it, all the clutter, all the chaos. Anais Nin, a French-American novelist and author, added something to that I have always loved this quote and think is important. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So when we are having reactions and responses and we're feeling as if something is outside of us, forcing things that we don't necessarily want in our lives, maybe that is our outmoded way of responding and processing. And maybe our work is to pay attention to our thoughts and beliefs as we teach in Unity that our thoughts and our words have power. So we want to be very clear about where we are focusing. And there are a lot of metaphysical and psychological teachings that support this. Again, through my training, I learned a lot about cognitive theory and a cognitive framework and changing your thoughts to change your life. It goes right along with Charles Fillmore. Spiritual understanding reveals truth beyond appearances. Ernest Holmes, thoughts are things, the law of mind action. All of our New Thought teachings support this. So when we stop resisting these moments that occur, it gives us insight, the opportunity to more fully understand and to see what's at play here. Now, we don't quite know how Reverend Doug's issue is going to unfold, but I think all of us are joining with him in seeing it as flowing perfectly and beautifully and lovingly, because he leads with his heart. And that's what will bring him the peace and the closure that he is seeking. And we do like that closure, do we not? So one of the things I learned in my 12-step programs is the idea of keeping my side of the street clean. Anybody ever heard that phrase before? A few of you. And it's become popularized in a way that you don't have to have ever gone to a 12-step program, but it's so impactful because some of us learn to be over-responsible and to think if a bird fell out of the sky that somehow we caused it to happen, even though it had absolutely nothing to do with us. Well, when you're in 12-step programs, you learn that you just keep your own space. You stay in your own lane. You keep your side of the street clean. You don't have to go over and clean up after X, Y, and Z. You just stay focused on what's yours to do. When we become more clear, it helps us to live more peacefully with greater understanding and aligned with our purpose. Marcel Proust, a French novelist, said, one of my most favorite quotes, it was on a card somebody gave me in the 90s, and I still have the card because I like the quote and the art so much. It says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new landscapes, but in seeing with new eyes, fresh eyes, spiritual eyes. That's what gives us the peace and the confidence and the understanding. That relates to the shift in consciousness that we're all seeking. So as you reflect, and I did put some handouts on the back table. I don't know if everybody picked them up as they came in, but you know how I like to give you takeaways. You know, that's the teacher, that's Nancy, the teacher, and I guess the therapist too, always processing. You know, my belief is if you're still living and breathing, there's still more to learn, there's still more to know about yourself, there's still more transformations that occur. So when we get compassionate, first with ourselves and then with other people, we get more insight, compassionate insight. When we're able to hear people's stories, even a little bit, it changes us. For about 10 years, I served as a trainer for the National Coalition Building Institute. And it was this particular group that I was affiliated with was out of UNT, the University of North Texas, but the big organization was in DC. But there was one particular part of our trainings that we did for corporations and all sorts of different groups. One time I went to San Antonio to do an NCBI training for a group of tax accountants. You can imagine how that started. They all came in with their suits and ties. They had their notebooks. They were prepared to take copious notes. We're like, that's not what this is about. It's about experiential activities. So anyway, speak outs. One of the things that you got to do as a part of your program, and they were either 4 hours roughly or longer, was to say something that you wanted no one to ever think, say, or do about your group again. And your group could be anything. I often chose to be in the group of divorced women, or sometimes I was a state employee, because there's a lot of thoughts about people who work for the state and what that means. But other people chose identities based on their culture or their race or their class background or their status in another way. And it was so empowering and powerful, because when you hear people speak out about how they've been hurt, you know, you can argue with statistics and all the things that people try to use, but when you hear somebody's personal story, that changes you. It gives you a new lens through which to appreciate them and see their struggle. When one of my best friends told a story, and she was a a tall, big-built African-American woman. And she was a vice president at UNT. And when she told the story of how she was followed in stores, it just broke my heart for her. And it at that time, it was somewhat of a new awareness for me about the mistreatment that she received. So as we begin to be more compassionate, we soften our gaze. We can give grace to other people. We can lean in to what their experience is. But we have to be first compassionate with our own selves, because most of us are mostly harsh critics of who we are and where we've been. We forget that voice and that song that Rachel and Russ just sang about I am light. The Dalai Lama said, we can never obtain peace in the outer world until we make peace with ourselves. And that's an ongoing opportunity. And I can see little tiny ways that I've made some incremental improvements. When I go to Kentucky, and I just got back late last night from a short little trip, I can tell that I have continued to evolve and change. I am taking things more gently. I am feeling lighter, but I still have work to do. And when we understand, our compassion skyrockets. So we need to pull some of these threads together so that we can live more full, more meaningful, more connected lives. Because when we don't feel good at ourselves, when we're not understanding the full capacity of who we are, we're not as likely to connect with the person across the aisle from you or the people sitting around you. And we need each other now more than ever. Would you agree? We need to stand with each other and by each other as allies, as supporters, as encouragers. There's not ever too much love that we can share with each other. So when we live with these new eyes, with these spiritual eyes, it gives us a perspective that feels hopeful. We can see past the headline. And I have tried in the last 6 months to only read headlines, but now I'm doubting that I can even keep managing that on a daily basis. I have to have it be more intermittent to maintain that peace. We walk in understanding. We release the need to control. We don't have to force outcomes. We can just stay in our lane and keep driving along on that spiritual journey in whatever kind of vehicle you want to envision yourself in, whether it's a race car or a Jeep, or maybe it's riding on a horse. I think I'm going to pick a horse for a while because I can see more, feel that connection to the earth. So I invite you today to begin to look through your spiritual lenses, to see with new eyes. And when you start feeling your heart rate escalate or your anger boiling over, ask yourself, where are my spiritual lenses? What do I need to see? How can I take some breaths and calm myself? If I'm listening to somebody with whom I may have a disagreement, how can I listen with curiosity? Curiosity solves a lot of problems for me because I'm not looking to make my next argument or point. I'm just trying to understand and imagine how this person coming from this situation has arrived at whatever point of view they're expressing. And I want to be a more compassionate person. That is so important to me, to lead with my heart, to love with my heart. And in doing all of that, I get to live in freedom. So I'm going to offer you an affirmation to close our time together today. And I'm going to break it up into smaller sections. So we can feel it, and so we can remember it, and so we can claim it as true for ourselves. The first part, with spiritual understanding. With spiritual understanding, I open to freedom. I open to freedom, peace, and truth. And so it is. God bless you.